So now, going from human-machine hybrid to now talking about machines themselves. And we have got here Dr. Mick Walters, who is a specialist in robotics. And he's going to share with us some of the things that he's been working at, what's happening in robotics at the moment. And actually, before we go on, how many people here in the audience, if I put my hand up here, I can see you all. How many people here have got quite a pessimistic view of the future, who think that technology is actually a bad thing for humanity? Okay, there's a couple there. How many people are very optimistic about what technology can do for humanity? How many people have the use of their arms? Yes. So actually we have a lot of optimists here. And that's a really interesting thing. I was actually expecting there to be more cynicists here. So you're all pro-technology, so I will now get out the road and I will leave Mick to do his talk.
Thank you very much. There we are. So I am an optimist by nature, and I do like technology. So I'm not, down on it for its own sake. But I do think that there are some things that we need to look out for. And rather than being more about the wonders of technology, perhaps I'm going to be talking some more about some of the potential drawbacks, and maybe make a few suggestions as to how we can actually guide this technology to do things that are useful and beneficial for you, rather than actually leading us down into some fairly awful places that has happened with previous technologies. So, me. There's me in my lab at work, and in my day job I do things. I make robots, construct them, modify them, and my main research is in the area of human-robot interaction. That's how robots can actually be controlled by people, how they can interact with people, and how they can be beneficial to people, the sorts of tasks they want them to do. And it's really looking into the future to see how, when robots move out into people's environments, the robots will actually be able to be interact with people in a friendly way, in an acceptable way, how they can basically, normal people can control them and get them to do the things that they want them to do. So we have a few research robots here, or sort of prototypes, that probably conform to everyone's idea of what a robot should be looking like, or what current robots look like, not necessarily what they'd actually want to do. In the last 30 years, the digital revolution has actually crept into everybody's lives. A lot of people now, as part of their jobs, spend a lot of time looking at a computer for one reason or another. We have robots, we have machines, we have computers running factories. Every office has perhaps dozens of computers doing all sorts of essential tasks. And online and network services, of course, in the last 10, 15 years, everybody is online, everyone's accessing the network. And there's huge benefits, huge entertainment value, and it's a huge resource in people's lives. We've seen how robotics, certainly in the developed nations, has taken over much of the work of people in factories, and where it hasn't taken over the work of people in factories, then jobs have actually been outsourced to other countries such as China, Russia, and the developing nations. So in this country, certainly, robots have taken over people's work, and also in offices, computers have taken over people's work. And currently, digital technology, though it's a sort of a back office sort of a process, currently technology is moving into the areas populated by middle managers, and it's seen as likely that in future less middle managers will be required. In fact, robotics and automation, even in places like China, China is putting in a huge amount of development into industrial robotics at the moment, with the aim of actually replacing a lot of their human labours, you know, humans in factories, with robotics and automation. Wonderful technology. So, and some of the speakers will be talking about some of the wonderful things that technology can do for us, and I've got no arguments with these. The potentials are enormous for actually benefiting everyone's lives and enhancing it, and doing all sorts of wonderful new things with the new digital technology. I work with robots, so I'm going to kind of be using robotics and robots as an example, but you can actually take a lot of what I say as having parallels in all sorts of areas where computers and digital technology will move in to take over aspects of, or will actually move into areas where we interact with them more in the future. We have robots, domestic robots. This is one of the types of robots that we're researching at Hertfordshire University. Here's an early prototype of a robot, and this is a rather opposed picture of a robot loading up the washing machine. No robot can actually do that at the moment, or some robots can do it in a fairly structured way, but most robots that you come across, but the technology is rapidly being developed, and in future it's seen that such robots would be able to do such tasks. Care robots helping to care for the elderly is a big development area. Infirm and incapacitated nursing, automation, cars, shops, factories making products we like and need to have. New creative media, we've already seen Neil talk about some of the media enhancements that you can make. Robot dance, theatre, virtual reality, games, entertainment, smart homes. These are all wonderful things and very desirable things for us all to have in our lives in the future. However, lessons from history are not always so beneficial. So, if we've talked about technological revolutions in the past, we can see that in going back a few hundred years, we have two big technological revolutions. We've got the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. These basically consisted of radical changes, and unlike the digital technology revolution that we're talking about today, these changes were played out over 100 or 200 years. The digital revolution that we're talking about is going to actually be played out probably over the next few decades. We're going to see increasingly radical changes in the way that we live our lives. From history, we can see the agricultural revolution started in the late 16th century and took around 200 years to get going. The changes reduced drastically the need for labour in agriculture. A lot of people were thrown out onto their own resources. They didn't have jobs anymore. They didn't have it, and the way things are set up at the moment, if you don't have a job, you don't have an income. For many people, eventually the bad effects were mitigated as that labour was then required for the succeeding industrial revolution. And again, those of you who studied in history at school, you probably know that the industrial revolution did not actually benefit a lot of the people who were involved in that. However, they did manage to survive to some extent, and the good thing was that they had jobs and they managed to have enough to eat just about. They didn't have great lives, of course, but they managed to survive. It's true that both these revolutions caused much hardship, and the reality was that if we look at an example of the potato famine in Ireland, Ireland had had many famines in the past, but they'd managed to get through them. But the problem was that the agricultural revolution had come along. It had literally, all the best areas were taken up by large farms, and the mass of the population was still working in agriculture. They were involved in what's called subsistence farming. In other words, they were growing their own food. Because they were growing their own food, any famine, they were literally on a knife edge, and when a famine came along, they literally did not have, you could not get enough to eat. The lack of concurrent industrial development, as in the mainland, meant that the people who were displaced, the people who were starving, literally didn't have any alternative way to gain an income. And in fact, during the potato famine, the population of Ireland fell from around 8 million to 6.5 million. There were about literally nearly 1 million people directly starved to death. The rest emigrated. They got up and moved, a lot of them to America, where they actually form a big kind of contingent of immigrant or Irish immigrants in that country. The UK government, again, there's arguments about whether their policies actually created, were deliberate, or they were kind of trying their best. In some people would argue both ways, but the fact is that anything they tried to do did not mitigate these starvation. It didn't really help the people. They set up workhouses and such like that. All these measures that they took didn't really make any great difference to the fact that a lot of people died and a lot of people immigrated. The signs aren't good, and one of the things that we often don't talk about is the problem of unemployment, and that's the unemployment in the developed countries. This is just a tally of the number of unemployed, or the percentage of unemployed people in developed countries. You can see the United Kingdom here, we're kind of smack in the middle, just 7.8 or 8% unemployment. That's official unemployment. Most governments have been creative in bringing down the raw or the kind of official unemployment figures, so possibly these percentages are even higher. Unemployment has been a problem since when I first left school. Jobs were plentiful, and during that time jobs have become more and more scarce. It's becoming very hard for youngsters especially, and a lot of this unemployment is young people. That's people us older people are going to be relying on to actually provide us with comfortable retirements. The first contact many people have, and I'm using robots as an example, the first contact many people may have with a robot is therefore going to be when it makes them unemployed. I used to work a long time ago in Vauxhall Motors, just down the road in Luton, in the assembly lines. At that time, 30,000 people were employed by that one plant. Vauxhall Motors just about exists at the moment. I think there's around 1,500 people there at the moment. So you've seen a huge reduction in employment in the traditional industries. A lot of that's been outsourced to different, to relatively undeveloped countries which have been developed. But the arguments for increasing automation and robotics don't still apply to even these developing countries, and eventually people will be thrown out of work there, and the idea is that they need to go on to do something else. Some predictions. If we look at unemployment trends, and the line to look at are these bars here, these latter orange parts are predicted unemployment. And the orange bit is the measure of uncertainty. This is just one prediction. If you look at predictions for unemployment in the developed countries, you'll find that all the predictions predict unemployment will increase. It shows a tapering off of unemployment, which is probably optimistic. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we'll probably find increasing unemployment going on. So my view is that the digital revolution has and will create many jobs in different areas, which will take up some of the slack from unemployment, people thrown out of employment by the application of robotics and automation and digital technology. However, the net result will be a lack of employment, or lack of employment for probably more people. The rate of implementing digital technology will accelerate, and that will replace humans in many areas. The economic logic, the way that things are set up at the moment, is that it becomes an economic no-brainer to get rid of your people and replace them with machines for individual firms. So in future, many more jobs will be lost overall than are created by the increased adoption of digital technology. If we look at the world population as it is, we're privileged, we're one of the rich people. Most people are poor. And what this graph shows is that, again, the top line is the one, net worth. It's increased up to around 2010, 2011 is the high point. And you can see the average, that's the mean net worth of people across the whole of the planet, is $5,000. That's not $5,000 a week or $5,000 a month, that's $5,000. That's the property that they own, their net wealth. These figures hide a great disparity because obviously a lot of people are very, very wealthy, and in fact everyone here is very wealthy compared to the vast majority of the population of the world. In 2004, 1.1 billion people lived in extreme poverty on less than $1, was it $1 a day? Can you imagine that? That's $1, that's less than what you pay for your coffee in the morning. Most people won't be able to afford domestic robots and virtual reality headsets if things carry on the way they are. There'll be an elite who can. Most people in the world won't. They aspire to get enough food into their stomachs. For most people, the agricultural revolution hasn't even arrived. They have no security of food supply. You can see that we have the developed countries in red. We have blue countries which are, in general, very poor. And we have the sort of a greeny colour, greeny brown countries, which are relatively developed. There's not starvation, but a lot of the population in these countries have a very hard life indeed. For huge swathes of the world, most people, they worry about how they're going to eat the next day. They've got no time to have a domestic. That's beyond their wildest dreams. What could happen? Based on the historical records, it's likely that the mass of the world's population, that's the people already poor, will stay poor. They will experience little change in their existing poor conditions as they're already economically superfluous to the developing countries. Unlike previous technological revolutions that we talked about, the demand for labour will fall. That's even in the developing countries, or the developed countries. In the UK, we've already seen this happening. The need for a lot of work from people, that's mental or physical work, is dropping. And most governments, they kind of try to ignore this as a product of the digital technology revolution. They think they can, okay, we can fiddle the figures, we can put people on benefit, we can take them off benefit onto incapacity benefit. At the moment, they're applying sticking plasters to the problem. The problem is that I think that unemployment as a way of gaining your living, or working as a way of gaining your living, working 40 hours a week is not going to be an option for a lot of people. Because most people gain their income through working, then they're not going to have an income to support buying all these wonderful new technical wonders for themselves. Even in China, where wages are low, it's now cheaper to use robots in place of people for manufacturing, which is it's the way that the economic pressures actually act in order to optimise production, optimise the amount that can be produced. I'll give an example, and that's autonomous vehicles. This is something that I know a little about. I don't know a wonderful amount about, but basically most of the big manufacturers have an autonomous vehicle project. In universities and research institutes, these are very common. These are just a few of them, and even in earth-moving dumper trucks and such like industrial, they're replacing the human driver with an autonomous version, i.e. a computer that can do the job. Potentially, these vehicles are safer than human drivers. In fact, they probably are safer already. The main barrier is really the legal status and liability issues in case of an accident. Now, there's an argument that there's going to be higher standards of safety expected of these automatic vehicles than what there would be from a human driver, but I suspect most manufacturers, they talk about maybe 2020 everyone will be able to buy an autonomous vehicle, and even older cars will be able to be retrofitted. In fact, not just older cars, older lorries, older bus drivers. In the UK, I just looked up, when I was preparing this talk, I looked up, there's something like 2.5 million professional driving jobs in this country. It's a huge industry. Many, if not most of these, could be replaced by autonomous driving technology. Can you imagine all the taxi drivers, bus drivers, because these are the ones that will go first because they're generally owned by firms, they can put the investment in, and they'd be only too happy, well, economically, only too happy to replace their human drivers who take work breaks with a nice little computer that fits into the taxi, is linked into the phone system. You simply ring up, and 5 minutes later an autonomous taxi appears, you get in, you put your credit card into it, you go to where you want, no parking problems, it drops you off outside the door, out you get, and off it goes off to pick another customer. The increased use of autonomous taxis could also reduce private car ownership, and I've actually seen a projection by I can't remember the body, but they were talking about 250 million cars in the US being, privately owned cars being reduced to several tens of millions by as soon as autonomous drivers and people start taking off, especially in the city. I mean, who wants to own a car in London now? It's a liability, really, isn't it? So if you could just kind of phone up and have your own personal taxi, no hassle of sharing a bus or anything with other people, you don't have to wait around for it, it's there ready for you when you want it. It could be that private car ownership falls into a niche where it's just enthusiasts who like to own their own cars. Because of the safety issues, as soon as it becomes apparent that automatic cars are safer than human-driven cars, it may even be that you're not allowed to drive your own cars. You could see the steering wheel disappear entirely from a car. Can you imagine the changes in, just the way that we organise the UK, the cities in the UK? We don't need great big car parks anymore because cars, autonomous taxis just come in as they're needed. They don't need to park, they can just go out again and rest somewhere until they're needed again. So you could see changes in the way that the cities are organised, the way that we organise our lives, and the way that we actually spend things on. I mean, in the long run, autonomous cars may not be great for the car manufacturers either because they may not be selling so many products. So living in 2045, there's sort of the top there, we have our desired household robots. We've got a wonderful life. If you've seen the Jetsons, you can see all the sorts of wonderful things that potentially are there for us to use, to enjoy. The reality, is it going to be something like one of these sort of slum cities where most of the population, and that may be people, or the children of people sitting here, are actually reduced to just struggling as best they can, while we have an elite who actually own a lot of the resources, are able to afford all these wonderful things. My opinion is that if things carry on as they are, that's what's going to happen. In the worst case, people in the UK, we have a fairly enlightened life at the moment. People in the UK, a lot of people in the UK may actually be headed towards this latter future. So, and looking at this, there's some projections, historical trends. Here's the present. It was done in 2000s, talking about food per capita, food per person, services per capita, all rising up. And I'm a little bit worried about this, if you can't see that, it says general economic collapse in 2030. We've had a little taste of that world economic collapse in the last few years. Potentially the collapse could be even bigger, because in the long term, all those short-term forces in the economy lead firms to kind of replace people by robots and automation. Eventually, they're going to find that they start running out of customers for these products. We've already seen how whole countries can be marginalised because there's no profits to be made there. There's no profits for companies in supplying fresh water in some area in Africa. There's no profits providing healthcare to people who haven't got the money to pay for it. So you have all these short-term profits, all these short-term economic forces mitigating against any desirable long-term outputs. Now, I think it is likely that it's not just those from the current undeveloped countries today who will be excluded. You're going to see increasing numbers. Already it's happening. There's unemployed people who really don't earn enough to actually have much more than feed, clothe themselves. There's a lot of public provision which kind of makes up some of the shortfalls. But already people are complaining about paying a proportion of their taxes towards helping these people to have a reasonable standard of life. And I can see those forces actually continuing as well. So the thing is, it's not just other countries that will be excluded, or people in other countries. It will be people here who will be in the same position if we just close our eyes and hope for the best. What can we do? Now, I am an optimist by nature, so this has actually made you feel a little bit kind of taking the wind out of your sails. I'm sorry about that. But although the developed economies of the West account for only 15% of the Earth's working population, the increase in unemployment between 2000 and 2010 was 55% of the increase was from the developed countries. As a rule, people in undeveloped countries aren't underemployed. They may not be officially employed, but they have ways of making a living. Here, when you're unemployed, when you don't have a job, it means that you're excluded from a lot of the benefits of people, enjoyed by people who work. And unfortunately, our income, for the most part, unless you happen to be in the very privileged position of having an independent income, for the most part, most of us earn our living by working. So we've already talked about how economic incentives work over the short term. They don't actually address any of these probably longer term issues. The solution possibly is redistribution of money to increase the customer base. In other words, that's taking money that's away, that's held by very rich people, and that's unfortunately us, to actually give to people in less privileged positions to allow them to grow the customer base. The thing about this is, and Henry Ford knew this very well, that when he started his business making cars, he paid his employees exceptionally well, and most of them actually bought a car from him. So he actually funded his own, expansion, economic expansion, on his employees buying the product that they were making. In his book entitled The End of Poverty, Jeffrey Sachs argued that extreme global poverty could be eliminated by 2025 if the wealthy countries of the world were to increase their combined foreign aid budgets to between 135 to 195 billion from 2005 to 2015. Well, it's 2013 now, and I don't see any signs of even that limited aim being achieved. And that's not just allowing people to buy virtual reality headsets or whatever, or new technology. It's actually allowing people to eat, to be, have a reliable food source, and maybe good drinking water. So it's still not enough for most of the people in the world to be able to afford all these wonderful new technologies. Now, the solution is really we need to start planning, we need to start thinking ahead of where we want to be. And that's really what the aim of this symposium is all about, thinking, what do we actually want for the future? And it means that we need to decide what sort of things we want, what sort of things the rest of the world would want, and what would be the best outcome for everybody. Or maybe you don't think like that, you think you're going to be one of the elite, so you don't have to worry. To conclude, we've got robots, new technologies and services are desirable but expensive. The costs will come down, but in the long term, these will be things that people have to afford in some way. Whether it's provided for them or whether they buy these things themselves, they still have to actually have some way of buying those things. The problem needs a world economic solution. It needs agreement from all countries. Simply that. This is why I'm so pessimistic, because they can't even agree on what to have for lunch at the UN. So it's getting agreement from all countries to actually decide on how best to develop economically. It is very, very difficult. There's the problem that one country, if they lower taxes on corporations, they end up with a lot of inward investment all of a sudden. So the short-term rewards for lowering taxes, etc., are very great. And it only needs one country to step out of line, and then everybody does it. And then you end up in a sort of a Dutch auction where they're saying, come here because everything's so wonderful for you, but the population of the country tends to suffer because of the poorer conditions, the lack of income produced. We all need to decide what we want to achieve, i.e., hopefully access for all to benefit, and that includes not just an elite, but you and me, and a lot of other people as well. And develop and coordinate with other countries to achieve this. So it's a sort of economic and political solution aspect to actually allowing these benefits to accrue to everybody. Thank you very much.
Just one question. We're both in education. You're an academic. One of the things we were talking about was in the future, there's going to be new jobs around, jobs that don't exist right now. The way that education is set up these days is to train people for a particular job. Do we need a different approach to education, so it's actually training people to be able to be trained?
Yes, because training is different from education. Education is really for your own benefit, possibly in your working benefit, but also in your personal life. Training is really for the benefit of your employer, you know, and we've seen how, well, you're probably realising this, jobs for life aren't an option anymore. You're going to have to, you know, maybe do several different careers because the inrush of digital technology is going to change things so rapidly. I could have started, you know, if I could have spent, say, doing microprocessor programming of the Z80, well, even if I'd stayed in the field of microprocessor programming, I'd have had to revise my kind of, the work that I do probably dozens of times, if not once every year, with all the advances in digital technology. Robotics is going to develop. You're going to see things that, well, us roboticists are actually quite close-minded when it comes to developments of robotics. I'm sure once the younger generation get hold of it, they're going to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things that we couldn't even dream about. It's one of the things I like doing is working with artists, actually, because they often give a very different perspective on what us kind of old farty roboticists, you know, what we're going to do. Yeah, things are going to. But yeah, education is definitely going to have to change, and it's one of the key aspects of this. Everyone has to be knowledgeable about where they want to be, perhaps look ahead a bit more than they are at the moment.
Fantastic. Mick, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.